How's it going, guys? Today's topic, I want to discuss how to avoid the most crucial mistakes when you're looking to withdraw money from your IRA account. So the way on how I structured this video is I want to go over the 4 most common mistakes, ultimately how to avoid those common mistakes regarding different sorts of solutions, and then what you could do at the end of this video if you need help for your specific situation and would like to speak to one of our specialists. So you would simply call 1-800-566-1002 or click on the calendar link that is embedded in the description of this video. So once again, what are the common mistakes? How to avoid these mistakes to produce a stress-free retirement? That's the whole purpose of this. If you get to that stage of retirement and you have different IRA accounts, whether they were established that you were making contributions into those plans, or you took monies from your employer-sponsored plans and rolled them over into IRA accounts, think of these IRA accounts like individual buckets, and how or why should you leverage these buckets most effectively, most efficiently, and avoiding those landmines. If you do this correctly, you're going to have bliss, you're going to have happiness, you're going to be able to remove those stresses, that financial stress throughout your retirement years, so you can live every single day without that stress and ultimately remove deathbed regrets. So mistake number 1 is pulling out too much money too quickly. This is a very common mistake. And what ultimately happens when somebody unfortunately does this move? They will run their well dry. When they run their well dry, they have no more money left. When they have no more money left, they either have to significantly downsize or go back to work. So that's obviously a horrible doomsday situation. There's some different factors that come into play. First off, have a strategy. Distribution. Understand what your expenses are right now and what your expenses are going to be when you hit your ideal retirement date. If you're already in your ideal retirement date, take an inventory off of what those expenses are. Make sure that you have a baseline to cover your necessary expenses, and then you could add on some additional ones to cover for the different inflationary-based expenses. And maybe you want to increase this through vacation, or you want to increase this by joining a country club, joining a golf club. Whatever that case might be, there's going to be some sort of mathematical component to it, and then backing up into the math. Not only figuring out what your expenses are, but then also having an inventory of what are my cash flows? What exactly am I going to be receiving? If I'm no longer working, I'm no longer going to be able to receive my occupational income. Am I going to be receiving money from Social Security income? Do I have a pension? If I don't have a pension plan, then obviously no money's coming from there. Do I have rental properties? If you're taking money from rental properties, what's actually the amount that you're able to net after taxes or after deductions, all those different things? Is there a specific gap there? So by taking an inventory off of what your cash flow situation is versus what your expenses are, there may be some sort of gap. The common mistake that's made, and there's a terminology that I want you to always remember, it's called reverse dollar cost averaging. And that's taking on way too much risk and paying way too high of fees on an account that could potentially go down. So this sort of risk is geared primarily towards a distribution planning strategy. What happens when somebody has a distribution planning strategy or has an account that they're looking to take withdrawals or distributions from? Well, they're pulling monies from that account. So any dollar that you're taking out of that account is obviously going to result in a negative. On top of it, if somebody's leveraging an accumulation strategy or a very expensive growth-related strategy, that could come and bite them in the butt. What I mean by that is, let's say if an individual typically is leveraging a mutual fund or different slews of mutual funds, and they're paying anywhere between 1% to 2% on those mutual funds. That's a hole in the bottom of that IRA bucket. So the individual pulled out money that year to cover their expenses. That's one hole coming out. The other one is additional fees from the actual expense ratios of that mutual fund related fee. On top of it, let's say if you're using a financial advisor, that financial advisor is not going to work for free. Typically, they charge anywhere between 1% to 2%. Those are additional fees coming out of that account. Even if it's a fee-based planner, those dollars are still coming out of the account. Regardless of the market going up or going down or your account going up or going down, that fee is still draining out of your account. Then if the market goes down, unfortunately goes down and you have a bearish run, as you start pulling out monies, especially when you first start retiring, that's now having a power of compound interest effect that's magnifying the amount of holes or withdrawals or the amount of fees and distributions coming out of your account. So this is where, by having a proper distribution strategy, you want to make sure to plug up those holes. And you want to say, okay, these are my necessary expenses. I want to calculate exactly what I need and then back up into the math. So based on what your cash flow strategy is, based on what those gaps are, how do you close up those gaps in the most effective and efficient manner with something that will charge you the least amount in fees and then also produce income that will last you for the rest of your life or yours and your spouse's life? Distribution planning is entirely different than accumulation planning. The problem that occurs when somebody's nearing retirement, somebody hits that retirement date, they've always been in that accumulation, that growth-related mindset. When you're no longer working, you can't take on that same amount of risk because you don't have that longevity on your side. Now it's the crucial years. Now it's saying, okay, how exactly do I reduce this exposure? How do I make sure that I at least have some sort of baseline, some sort of level of income that's always coming to me and my family, so that we're covering our necessary expenses? Anything above that, now you can start working on different inflationary hedges. You could work on different things that could be set up for that vacation-related fund, for those trips, for those additional memberships, for getting gifts for the kids, for the grandkids, whatever that case is. Each individual is going to be different, but by making sure that you have a proper distribution strategy and you're not just going into it with an accumulation mindset and falling victim to that reverse dollar cost averaging effect, that's how you could at least have somewhat of a fighting chance to avoid that mistake. Now, there are some better solutions for this, but I just want you to be mindful of what these crucial mistakes are so that you're able to understand, okay, this is something that I can avoid and I could put myself in a much better mathematical position. Common mistake number 2 is taking on too much market risk. Now, individuals are typically set in their ways. So as they're working, how are their accounts growing? They made contributions into, let's call it an employer plan like a 401k. They made contributions into that plan. They were getting matching money from that plan. And then they were also choosing their different investment options. And based on how well those investments performed is going to add further positives to that bucket. So the contribution is one side of the coin. The rate of return is the other side of the coin. And together, you had power of compound interest and longevity on that individual side to try to capture what the market growth has been during that individual's working years. Well, when they start nearing that retirement stage, they are no longer contributing to that plan. They are no longer getting a matching money into that plan. They typically take the 401k in that example and they'll roll it over into an IRA. So now the way on how they're customizing that IRA, they can still leverage investment related strategies, but you have to be very careful with doing so. An individual's risk tolerance could be completely different when they're 65 years old versus when they're 40 years old, because that time horizon is shortened. If you experience a large downward market crash and you set up your monies too aggressively and the market's just basically ebbing and flowing, it's going to go up, it's going to go down, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. If you just so happen to time it at the wrong point, that could be devastation. That could be an entire lifestyle change when you do get to your retirement years or throughout your retirement years. And once again, having to go back to work, having to either take on more risk to try to make up for that large loss that occurred. And there's a big problem there. So typically what's wise is when an individual is getting older, their risk tolerance is going to change. They're saying, okay, I want to have a rate of return of my money as opposed to on my money. So instead of taking on a large risk to get a large rate of return, maybe they'll take on significantly less risk to get an okay rate of return. So that's more consistent. You have less volatility in there. So just be mindful of that market risk, because there are different ways on how you could pad up your accounts properly, leveraging fixed accounts, leveraging fixed indexed accounts, but then still leaving slivers, leaving portions aside that should be meant for max accumulation and should be meant for max risk. But you don't want to commingle that if you have to create some sort of distribution strategy. If you want to create some sort of growth related strategy, make sure that each lane is optimized for what your risk tolerance is so that it works. It basically fits like a perfect puzzle piece. So that is crucial mistake number 2, taking on too much market risk. This is something that's extremely common. Common mistake number 3 is not paying attention to taxes. Be mindful that when you are no longer working, you're no longer paying FICA Medicare related taxes. But you still have a whole slew of taxes to Uncle Sam that need to be paid. Very simplistically speaking, federal taxes, state taxes based on what state that you reside in, you're going to have capital gains tax rates. So you might have short-term capital gains taxes. You might have long-term capital gains taxes. You may be taxed on your Social Security income. So individuals are typically taxed anywhere between 0 to 85% of what their Social Security benefit is to their ordinary income tax. So as an example, there's something called provisional income with Social Security taxation. So if you're above a specific threshold, that's going to determine how much of your Social Security benefit is going to be taxed. Simply put, if let's say you are making $10,000 of Social Security income, but 85% of that has to be taxed at the ordinary income tax rate. And let's say your ordinary income federal tax rate is 10%. So $10,000 was made, or you collected $10,000 when you hit retirement from Social Security income. And on top of it, you're in a 10% federal income tax bracket. Well, up to 85% of that $10,000 of the income that you're making from Social Security, if you're going to be above that provisional income threshold, up to 85% of that could be taxed. So if we do that simple math, that means $8,500 of your $10,000 Social Security income is going to be incorporated in your ordinary income taxes. So in that example, that tells us $850 of your $10,000 Social Security income distribution is taxable. Be mindful, if you're at a 20% bracket or 25 or 30% bracket, obviously those numbers increase. So there's different taxation. Let's say if you're taking money from an IRA account, those are going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. If let's say you're pulling monies from Roth IRA accounts, well, those could be 100% tax-free. So that could give you a nice benefit. Let's say if you make too much money and you're paying into Medicare Part B and Medicare Part D, but you make too much money, you could have an additional surtax onto, it's known as IRMA taxes, onto that Medicare related tax. So there's a lot of kind of, excuse my language, shit out there that you have to be very mindful of when it comes to taxation off of what you're going to be able to take distributions on and how to ultimately calculate that in your distribution strategy with your IRA accounts to make sure you're not taking too much money from your IRA accounts. Therefore, it's going to shove up the provisional income number and therefore hurt you from a Social Security taxation standpoint, or even hurt you from an ordinary income, federal income tax percentage rate. So, just be mindful of different ways on how you can not necessarily avoid those taxes. Those taxes are always going to be there. Obviously, they say that the two things that are certain are death and taxes. You're always going to have to pay taxes, and everyone's unfortunately going to pass away. So how exactly can you now reduce this burden, either as you're nearing retirement or when you're in retirement, and possibly do Roth conversions as an example, or make sure when you're taking your income distribution strategy or you're creating your income strategy that you're going to be taking it from either tax-free monies, some taxable monies, some tax-deferred accounts, and have a perfect ratio so that it does not hurt you and jolt you into these other brackets and really when you need these monies the most. Remember, you're no longer working, so now you have to rely on these different assets, these different buckets to be able to liquidate properly and make sure that you're paying for what your expenses are, both your necessary expenses and some of your ancillary-based expenses based on really what you see as your ideal retirement situation. And the fourth most crucial mistake is not having a plan and hoping that things will just miraculously work out. You've neared retirement. You might be currently retired. How exactly can you stay retired forever? You want to make sure that you have some sort of plan. There's different ways on how you could go about this. You could either go through something I coined the 3-thing scenario, which means take an inventory off of what your current expenses are or what your expenses are projected to be. Look at what your cash flows are. If there's a gap between what your cash flow is and retirement, you do not have a strategy, you need to create a strategy. Use the smallest amount of dollars. If you have IRA accounts or some non-retirement accounts, or you have still 401k related accounts, cash accounts, whatever that case might be, Roth IRA accounts, take an inventory of all those different buckets and then look at, okay, how can I close this gap the most effective, the most efficient way? Use the smallest dollars only as much as necessary to do so. Then you can move on to step 2. Step 2 says I should have, rule of thumb, anywhere between about 6 to 12 months of whatever my expenses are. I should have it into some sort of liquid account that I could pull from at the drop of a hat. If different things happen, different oh my gosh moments were to occur when you're no longer working and now you have to actually pull from some dollars, you want to have those emergency needs met and have the emergency savings available to pull from at any point in time. And then lastly are the fund monies. So those are your growth related needs, your inflationary related needs. Maybe this is inheritance maximization. There's a whole slew of different things you could do with that step 3 fund monies, but the ultimate goal should be placing the smallest dollars only as much as necessary in step 1, the smallest dollars only as much as necessary in step 2, and then leaving the most amount of money on the sidelines in that fund account for that step 3, for that growth, inflation, inheritance, whatever that case is. Maybe for taxation purposes, you're doing different conversions, and that's where that step 3 is going to basically come in. So there's a whole slew of different things. But what you should not do is just hope for the best. You know what? I worked my whole life to get up to this point. I have 500,000, I have 800,000, I have $1 million saved up. That should be more than enough. And, I'll just glide off into the sunset. I'm not going to worry about risk. I'm not going to worry about distribution planning. I'm just going to basically go about my day and hopefully everything works out. And that is not having a plan. That is just simply having a portfolio. And you could be subject to a lot of really bad things and a lot of financial stress when that occurs. So that's where, avoid those crucial mistakes. And now I'm going to go through each one and say, okay, if you do this correctly, what exactly will your retirement situation look like? Number one is you will not outlive your retirement savings. If you set this up correctly, you have a proper distribution strategy, you understand exactly what your investment, your growth related strategy is. You might have a solution for estate planning needs and say, I want to make sure that I'm leaving X amount of dollars to my kids, to my grandkids. I want to make sure that I'm paying the least amount of money to Uncle Sam. All these different things, when you do this effectively and you're making sure it's very efficient and you have certain longevity insurance, you have certain things that you cannot outlive, and you're using the smallest dollars only as much as necessary to do so, you're going to have peace of mind, you're going to have bliss that you will never outlive those retirement savings. Number 2, you will not be concerned when the market drops. Based on what your risk tolerance is, based on really what your appetite for risk is. So some individuals are risk tolerant, some individuals are risk averse. If you're more risk tolerant, well then it's not going to really affect you if the markets are really going to ebb and flow. But how much of your dollars should be at risk? Would it make more sense to leverage something that will bring a safer route off of a bulk of those dollars or half of your monies to make sure, okay, I have this bird in the hand. I at least have some sort of fixed rate of return or upward market growth rate of return, but not lose anything whenever the market goes down off of a portion of my dollars, so that now I could sacrifice and take advantage of the market, doing well or kind of bouncing all around, because I don't need to rely on the market growth for my chance of retirement success. So that's why when done correctly, when you're leveraging the correct investments, you're leveraging the correct accounts or safe related accounts, whatever that case is, each individual situation is going to be different. Each risk tolerance is going to be different. Each goal is going to be different. But when you have a clear-cut picture and you're optimizing each lane effectively, you're not going to be concerned when the market drops. And then third, you will give the least amount of money to Uncle Sam. If you understand what your taxation situation is going to be when you hit retirement, and you actually have a plan to avoid a large portion of those taxes or do that in the most effective and efficient way, what does that do? That gives the least amount of money to the government, the least amount of money to Uncle Sam for having to really rake you over the coals with taxes. How can you reduce that tax bill? How can you have that peace of mind to say, okay, when I'm in my 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever that case is, I know what I'm pulling out. Is it going to be 100% tax-free? Is it going to be taxable off of just a very small portion of it because you structured your plan out correctly? Those are the different things that we try to help out individuals on a daily basis to make sure that all these 3 main mechanisms are covered. At the end of the day, don't just have a portfolio, have a plan. If you set this up correctly, you will be able to live every day without financial stress and ultimately without deathbed regrets. When you go into retirement, you'll be able to walk into the sunset saying, I have my different areas covered. I have my income streams are covered. I have my emergency needs are covered. I have my growth related needs are covered. And whenever I pass away, this is how much is getting left over to my beneficiaries. Healthcare is another aspect, which I didn't really mention in some crucial mistakes, but that's another thing to incorporate, which you could leverage towards really the ancillary related need or a portion of dollars you could set up for a necessary expense related need. There's a whole multitude of different things. It really is based on the individual, based on their family, based on their health history, based on their longevity, all those different factors. But, at the end of the day, this is how you could have bliss and success throughout retirement. If you're interested in speaking to either myself or one of my other advisors, simply call our 1-800 number up on the screen. It's 1-800-566-1002. make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Retire Sharp, so you have access to the most updated videos. And if you would like something more flexible, you can always click on the calendar link, which is going to be embedded in the description of this video. I want to thank you very much for watching this, and please stay informed by subscribing to Retire Sharp on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you very much.